evening. For only the fifth time in her 68-year reign, the Queen has addressed the nation outside her annual Christmas broadcast. She's paid tribute to the NHS and key workers keeping goods and services going amid the coronavirus outbreak, and said that when the country succeeds in overcoming it, that success will belong to us all. Barely an hour after the Queen's address, it emerged that the Prime Minister has been admitted to hospital on the advice of his doctors after having continuous symptoms of the coronavirus. More on that shortly, but first here's our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell on the Queen's address.
From Windsor Castle, a broadcast by the longest-serving head of state in the world, a speech without parallel in her reign as Britain and the wider world face an unseen threat.
While we have faced challenges before, this one is different. This time we join with all nations across the globe in a common endeavour, using the great advances of science and our instinctive compassion to heal. We will succeed, and that success will belong to every one of us.
She spoke first to those facing the most immediate challenge.
I want to thank everyone on the NHS frontline, as well as care workers and those carrying out essential roles, who selflessly continue their day-to-day duties outside the home in support of us all. I'm sure the nation will join me in assuring you that what you do is appreciated, and every hour of your hard work brings us closer to a return to more normal times. Together we are tackling this disease, and I want to reassure you that if we remain united and resolute, then we will overcome it.
She praised the way people had come together to help each other and support the health services, and she thanked those who'd followed the government guidelines to stay at home. Our collective response, the Queen said, would define us.
I hope in the years to come, everyone will be able to take pride in how they responded to this challenge. And those who come after us will say the Britons of this generation were as strong as any. But the attributes of self-discipline, of quiet, good-humoured resolve, and of fellow feeling still characterise this country. The pride in who we are is not a part of our past. It defines our present and our future.
She recalled her first broadcast as a teenager during the Second World War, when she'd sought to comfort children who'd been sent away from their homes for their own safety.
Today, once again, many will feel a painful sense of separation from their loved ones. But now as then, we know deep down that it is the right thing to do.
For all the current hardships, the Queen said, we would come through it.
We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again. But for now, I send my thanks and warmest good wishes to you all.
It had been an exceptional broadcast for an exceptional moment. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
In the last hour, Downing Street has said that the Prime Minister has been admitted to hospital in what's being described as a precautionary step. He tested positive for coronavirus 10 days ago. Our political correspondent Chris Mason is here. What do we know, Chris?
Statement published by Downing Street at 9:10 this evening, a Number 10 spokesman telling us that on the advice of his doctor, the Prime Minister has tonight been admitted to hospital for tests. The spokesman goes on to tell us that it's a precautionary step. The Prime Minister continues to have persistent symptoms of coronavirus, as you say, 10 days on after testing positive for the virus. He's been in self-isolation for those 10 days, remaining there, as is the advice, because his symptoms hadn't cleared up. We have seen and heard from him since he's been in self-isolation, including the other night, clapping on his own at 8 o'clock, as so many of us did, for NHS workers, and he's been continuing to chair cabinet meetings and carry on as Prime Minister from self-isolation. I'm told it was the persistence of these symptoms, including a high temperature, rather than a further deterioration in his health, that led to tonight's decision. He was taken to an NHS hospital in London early this evening. It was not an emergency admission. decision reached on the advice of his doctor. It was considered sensible that he could see doctors face to face rather than being consulted over the phone. He's expected to stay in overnight. Number 10 are describing the test, as I say, as routine. He is still leading the government tonight. Boris Johnson is in contact with ministerial colleagues and officials, but the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, who is the first Secretary of State, is going to lead the government's coronavirus meeting first thing tomorrow morning. The Prime Minister, alongside the Queen, personifies, doesn't he, the country's public response to this pandemic, and he's experiencing the unpleasant reality of it.
Chris Mason, thank you. Well, earlier the Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, said that it is mission critical that people obey the social distancing restrictions and that a ban on outdoor exercise is possible if they are flouted. The latest figures show that 621 people died in UK hospitals in the last 24 hours after testing positive for coronavirus. That's nearly 100 fewer than yesterday. The total number of deaths across the UK now stands at 4,934. Our health editor...
For our physical and our mental health, but please do not bend or break this rule. We can't rule out further steps, but I don't want anyone to think that any changes to the social distancing rules are imminent, because the vast majority are following the rules.
At the Downing Street news briefing, the latest information on hospital admissions in England was shown. After a downward move, the London figure has carried on rising, and there was a steep increase in the northwest. All other regions saw increases. Officials said the NHS did have the capacity to manage the caseload.
We still, as the Secretary of State has said, have capacity in all of our hospitals to manage these cases, and we're hoping in due course, if everybody continues to practice social distancing.
Well, Italy, meanwhile, has recorded its lowest daily death toll in over 2 weeks, a further sign that the country is starting to get the disease under control. But the reality on the ground is still very bleak for many Italians, particularly amongst poorer communities. From Rome, Jean Mackenzie reports.
At this moment, I have no way to have money. No.
On these balconies, there's desperation. People who've not been able to work now for weeks.
Ho ricevuto la telefonata di una mia conoscente, mi ha chiamato in lacrime, aveva finito tutti i soldi che aveva da parte, è rimasta con 2,50 € in tasca. C'è qualcosa per noi?
Tito started bringing food to those who can no longer afford to buy it. Like Stefano, who sells houses for a living, and now can't feed his 2 young children.
We've been living without money from more than 1 month. We changed our life from one day to another one. Everything changed. Everything. It's not your life.
Casual work is common here, so for many, the money has simply stopped.
Maria Rosa?
Like for Maria Rosa, yesterday her money ran out.
Quando sei mamma agisci un po' come gli animali, cioè ti preoccupi che ci sia del cibo sulla tavola. Mi sono sentita disperata perché dico qui stiamo affondando.
These sacrifices have helped fight the epidemic here. The situation is finally improving, but the price has been high.
This virus has taken thousands and thousands of lives, but it's also taken people's livelihoods, it's taken people's futures, it's taken some people's very last pennies.
Qualsiasi cosa, non esitare a chiamare.
The government has promised to pay part of people's wages, but 4 weeks into this strict lockdown, the money hasn't arrived. Applications only opened last week.
Do you accept it's taken too long for this money to come through?
Abbiamo coscienza che c'erano dei tempi lunghi e per questo li stiamo facendo in modo di accorciarli quanto più possibile. Il mio impegno è stato e sarà massimo per tutelare tutti.
Le persone in difficoltà sono veramente tante. Qui c'è sta pane, pizza.
Here they've given up on political promises.
L'unico modo per stare tranquilli è aiutarsi tra popolo, tra cittadini.
Italy may be starting to control this virus, but it's unprepared for the devastation it's leaving behind. Jean Mackenzie, BBC News, Rome.
Meanwhile, Spain has reported its lowest number of daily deaths linked to coronavirus for more than a week. The latest figures show nearly 700 people died, taking the total number to 12,400. The country has just over 130,000 confirmed cases, which is the second highest in the world after the United States. Nearly 400 companies that provide care for people in their own homes have told the BBC that they don't have enough personal protective equipment. Some fear they will run out of supplies within days, with a serious impact on their ability to care for people with coronavirus symptoms. Our social affairs correspondent